evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to all the people in the audience for attending. It's good to see a packed meeting. I hope we get as much participation from the public as we can. A few matters of housekeeping. Audio recordings are made of all our meetings, and these recordings are published on the Council's website. Please, would anyone or everyone use microphones at all times? That goes to councillors and members of the public who are speaking. And please make sure you speak directly into the microphone. Members of the committee may use electronic devices to access the meeting papers, and the use of mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, by visitors is welcomed, but you're requested to use them discreetly, to set them to silent, and to not use voice or camera flash functions. Those using such devices are asked to remain seated during the meeting. There are no planned fire alarm tests, so if the alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and go to the assembly area in the car park at the rear of the town hall. There are toilets on every floor in the building, and an induction loop system is in this room. I'm Martin Goss. I'm the chair of the Local Plan Committee, and officers and fellow councillors will introduce themselves. I will start on my right.
Lynn Barton, Shrub End Ward.
Barry Cook, Councillor, St Anne's Ward.
You are.
I'm sorry, Elizabeth Blundell. I'm the Ward Councillor for Marks Tay.
Councillor Christopher Arnold, Fordham and Stour Ward.
John Giles, West Mersey.
Andrew Ellis, Birch and Winstry.
Gerard Oxford, Highwoods.
Hugh Nash, Beerchurch Ward.
Eddie Bacon, Affordable Housing Development Officer.
Laura Chase, Planning Policy Manager.
Karen Syrett, Place Strategy Manager.
Good evening, I'm Amanda Chidgey, I'm Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you for that, everybody. There are no substitute members that I know of this evening. There are no urgent items. Are there any declarations of interest from any councillor that they need to declare associated with the meeting agenda? Councillor, who are you? Nash.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be bringing up matters on item 9, which will require me to declare an interest in the Angling Trust, Eastern Regional Freshwater Forum, Environment Agency and Paxman's Angling Club.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Jowers.
It's probably appropriate that to mention that I'm a member of the County Council Development and Regulation Committee, and that also I was a member of the East of England Local Plan panel, which formulated the Regional Spatial Strategy, which features quite heavily in this.
Sounds electrifying, thank you. And Councillor Cook.
Just to let you know that under the Indoor Facilities Strategy, I'm a member of the West End Bowling Club.
Okay, thank you. Any other declarations of interest from anybody? Okay, so we move on to item 5, which is Have Your Say. We have 2 speakers under the Have Your Say General Statements and Questions section. The first speaker is Mr. Tony Barker. So if Mr. Barker, you'd like to take your seat, and you have 3 minutes from when the bell goes.
Good evening. My name is Tony Barker. I taught at the University of Essex in the Department of Government for over 30 years, and for the whole of that time in the field of British government, town and country planning was my continuous research and activity. And I thought it might be an opportunity to make a very general comment, if I may, about the quality of the housing which will result from this particular local plan cycle. And I'd like to speak in the very strongest support for urging Colchester and its neighbours to try as hard as it possibly can within planning law to adopt a garden city or garden village design approach. I'm not concerned with any land allocations tonight, nor indeed with the scheme that I believe Ted Gittins, a former Deputy Chief Planner of the Borough, has put forward on behalf of clients. I haven't even seen his scheme. I'm concerned only with the general policy. Ever since we've had town and country planning, people who have been dissatisfied with it have talked about the importance of positive planning as opposed to negative and reactive planning. You had Councillor Manning last meeting talking about his hopes for the local plan process to achieve all sorts of desirable ends in technical features, right down to LED light bulbs, and I don't know how far that is optimistic. But of course, much more traditionally, we have the architecture and layout approach to policy, very much associated with the Essex Design Guide, which began here in Essex and particularly in Colchester under our outstanding architect planner, Mike Shepherd, and his colleagues in Chelmsford, and it's become, of course, a national planning institution ever since. So we have a certain tradition to look back on here. I'd like, as I say, to urge in the broadest and briefest terms the importance of architecture and layout principles, which we can loosely describe as garden city and garden village. Developers can be open to a strong and clear policy declaration, particularly if they want to avoid delays and appeals. And appeal inspectors, for their part, dealing with any appeals on design grounds from decisions about design which they don't like, will have to realise that they have not only a duty to follow national policy of their minister, but also a duty to follow properly designated local policies. Colchester, I believe, could develop, once again, as Essex once had, with Colchester in close support, a national reputation, or at least a regional reputation, if it can associate itself with the garden design, the garden village layout, with all that we recognise in that great English planning tradition. And I think we should remember that apart from the prospect of doing the right thing and getting some reputation for it, insofar as it can be achieved, we should also bear in mind, frankly, a political point. You're at the moment concerned with allocations. You've got some very angry people concerned with particular allocations, and you're going to have to make difficult decisions, as we do every local plan cycle. Could I have one more sentence? I would say, bear in mind that 15 to 20 years from now, a lot of those sometimes bitter disputes will have been largely forgotten, and people will look at the results of whatever allocations you come up with. And if the design quality of those results merits it, it will be a real benefit for the future of the borough.
Thank you. Any councillor got a question they'd like to ask Mr. Barker on anything he said? Okay, no, you're free to go, Mr. Barker. Thank you very much for your contribution. Next up is Councillor Nick Cope. I think you know the rules. You have 3 minutes.
3 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. I've come to address the committee about the Irvine Road Orchard. The Irvine Road Orchard is currently allocated as open space in the current adopted plan. It is also identified in the plan as a local wildlife site. We understand, however, that the site has now been submitted by the new owner under the call for sites as land that may be suitable for future residential development. This was consulted on earlier on in the year, and the site was the subject of many objections. Previously, I had been informed by the officer about a recent appeal decision where the inspector concluded that we currently had an adequate housing supply and additional sites were not needed. I understand this is now overtaken by events, i.e. in the context of the new local plan. Nevertheless, it seems valid to point this previous finding out. So let's reconsider the merits. 1. The orchard is over 100 years old, one of only a handful of urban orchards left. It provides an unusually rich ecology and is a last link in a network of open spaces stretching down to Lexton Park in a town which already has a serious shortage of open space. The current LDP recognises this by its designation as a local wildlife site and private open space. It's also protected by a tree preservation order. 2, the orchard represents a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to provide children with access to outdoor education, and any chance of turning it into a community resource would be lost forever should the designation change. There are no good reasons for changing the current designation of the orchard, now or in the future. So this application should be decisively rejected to emphasise that the Council is prepared to stand by its policy decisions and not allow speculation to overturn several levels of protection. Over 300 objections have been made to the consultation on the Council's website, representing more individual objections than all other responses to the entire local plan, along with a petition signed by almost 400 people received by the Council. This proves conclusively the overwhelming opposition of the local people to any development of the orchard. The local community and schools want this orchard to remain and become an asset for future generations. They're relying upon the local plan committee to reject this and all other attempts to develop the land so they can continue in their efforts to acquire it and develop it as a genuine community orchard. Thank you for listening. I'm speaking on behalf of the local community and the Irvine Road Residents Association. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The only point I will make, and I'm sure Karen, if she wants to come back, will speak, is that, of course, this committee doesn't have the power or ability to pull sites in and out. I'd love to, because, you know, my views on development, but we can't. And every site, and I said this at the last meeting, that has been put forward will all go through the same process and be analysed, so every site will be treated the same. And I'm obviously very aware of the history of this site, the importance of it, and how it's currently and historically been designated. But obviously that will get looked at as part of the new process, and the officers, etc., will look at all bits of land that have been put forwards, and everything will be treated the same through the same criteria, which we actually discussed at the last committee. So I just wanted to make that point. As much as I'd personally love to take sites out, we as a committee cannot do that. If anyone else would like to ask Councillor Cope a question, please feel free. One other thing I should also say under point 5 of Have Your Say, there were only 2 people that came forward. Is there anybody else in the audience that wishes to speak that hasn't put their name down? Okay, that's fine. We'll move on. So we'll move on to item 6, which is to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of May and the 8th of June. Is everybody happy with the minutes, or is there anything that anyone needs to raise or question before we sign those off? Okay, thank you very much. So that leaves us to move on to item 7, which I shall get to. Wherever it is, what page is it? Okay, so Laura, would you like to take us through the item, the update on the local plan, please?
Right, this is an item for noting, just to keep the committee aware of the progress that we're making on preparing a new local plan. Moving ahead on all fronts, very much on the kind of general level that Mr. Barker was raising around the vision and objectives of the plan, and we're certainly very much looking at Garden City principles and seeing how we can hardwire good design into the plan. So that's part of the work covered the beginning around vision and objectives, and we've been discussing with members. We've got some workshops coming up with key members and stakeholders in September, so there's work on that front. We've included the report on objectively assessed housing need. That's the strand of work that gets us to the number at the end of the day of how many houses we need to build, which sometimes gets us more coverage than the work that we're also doing on the vision and objectives. But as you can see, it's a complicated process. It is because in the absence of a national target, there needs to be a clear way for every single authority in the land to show that they've got a consistent way of coming at numbers. And so the process has been agreed at national level. There's a methodology, and in most parts, authorities need to get consultants to help them prepare this work because it involves starting off with the population projections that the government provide us. And so it's in the guidance that you have to use the 2012 government projections on population and then use them as your starting point to then figure out what this means for your area and how many houses that you need to build. So this council has worked with Braintree, Chelmsford and Tendring. We've got Peterborough Associates to complete this work, and we're working jointly with those authorities. This reflects the fact that this area is seen to be a housing market area. That's quite a tricky thing to define in the southeast because clearly every area overlaps with every single other area. So the bar isn't set that high. It's about saying that the idea is that you should have an area that's about 70% self-containment, that people are moving within that area. Obviously, there's all sorts of movement every which way, so it's really trying to get the thing that more or less makes the most sense and can provide the most consistent approach. So it's been agreed that Braintree, Chelmsford, Colchester and Tendring can be looked at as a group, and that obviously then means we also need to work closely together, which we're doing. So the study, that's the first job of the study, is to figure out, where are people buying and moving around in what sort of area, and then starts to look at all these numbers and starts projecting ahead. So it begins with the overall number and then does adjustments and comes up with different scenarios and asks, well, what happens if you move this consideration around or another. In Colchester, for example, there's an issue around student housing, armed forces housing. All those things are looked at. The consultants also looked at the effect of the London market. And the reassuring thing is that when they came up with different scenarios, they all sort of, came up with very similar stories, so that there is a picture emerging of what's happening with the housing numbers. And that winds up with a number which is called the objectively assessed need. This has been seen, you'll see in the report, that comes out with a number of 920 houses a year. We did have some earlier work that had a higher figure, but that is just reflected. This work has gone back and sort of checked that, and we've got later numbers, and this work has done more refinements of checking all these things, and particularly the employment scenarios are very important to check, because employment, we're obviously working towards getting alignment between housing and employment. That's obviously the goal of everyone, but they're all related, so you have to be careful. If you say we're going to create too many jobs, then you get in a spiral of having to build ever more houses. So you have to have a realistic assessment, sort of looking at high, medium, low growth rates of employment, and then kind of looking backwards and forwards to see how everything affects everything else. So the report, I think, does a good job of making a complicated process hopefully understandable. I think it is complicated, so I think that they've done a good job of talking us through the process. So that work is obviously quite key, and it isn't our housing target. That's the very important thing to say, is that it's the objectively assessed need, the sort of basic number of houses. So what we now also have to look at is the area's development capacity, cross-boundary unmet need, and affordable housing need. So in this last bit of issue in particular, we're having to do more work, because affordable housing is a very important factor as well. So we're moving towards the target, but it's something that we still have to nail down before we publish the preferred options. But this is certainly, expected to be in the right ballpark of what we'd expect to see. The report then also explains about the assessment on the call for sites. I think it's indicative for Irvine Road. That site is being assessed through a process. The previous meeting of the committee has looked at the assessment framework we're using. So every single site that came into us is being evaluated using a consistent approach so that when we go to examination, we can show the inspector that we've looked at everything in the same way. And if we've discounted something, it's because we've discounted it for a reason that's the same as any other site. So that work is ongoing, and we're going through several hundred sites and using the assessment form for that. And then we are also then going on to use a sustainability appraisal process to allow us to consider it in terms of the spatial strategy that we want to follow and various other sustainability criteria. So then, in addition to the housing work need I've noted and the sports strategy covered elsewhere, we're also updating our evidence base on a number of issues: landscape character, local wildlife sites, flooding, archaeology, surface water management. So that evidence-based work is going on. And then, very importantly, we're trying to address how we should approach housing in the rural areas of Colchester. Obviously, the last plan focused on the urban area, so this time around we're looking at the larger villages and the extent to which proportionate growth could happen there. So we're talking to quite a few of the larger parishes in Colchester, going out to meet them, and they're looking at sites that have come to the call for sites and in our housing land assessment, and we're having conversations with them about exactly what they think, and we'll have a look at that along with also the view of where housing is needed to come to a view on that. And then obviously all of this work leads us to the point of actually writing some policies, which is something that we're starting on. We're very much relying on our existing policies as a good base to take forward, but then we're obviously updating it and changing things as necessary to deal with changing circumstances. We're certainly continuing to coordinate and work with Braintree and tendering, and we're trying to align our plan development process as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Let's open the floor up. Anybody wish to raise any points or questions? Okay, Andrew.
Just a brief one to start with, because I'm sure Councillor Giles will want to come in, but just within the whole of that discussion that we've just had, or the presentation you've just given, Laura, you haven't mentioned infrastructure once. And I just wonder what work we're doing with the growth that we're projecting and we're going to need to take, what work you're doing on working out what infrastructure is going to be needed to support that growth.
Yeah, absolutely. Each question, answer them as they're posed, I think, because otherwise stuff gets lost.
Sorry, there's so many different things we're doing. It's not that we're not doing these things. Yes, we have to prepare an infrastructure delivery plan. So we've had meetings before, and we're continuing to meet with the infrastructure delivery providers. So we're having conversations with the transport providers, utilities, and we'll need to do a plan that looks ahead and identifies where there's gaps and what's needed to serve. We'll take into account the needs of the existing population, but it's particularly focused on what else will be required. So that's very much part of the work that we're doing.
Councillor Nash, please.
It's going very quick one. In all of that time, you never mentioned Malden.
Well, we're waiting to hear on Malden. The Secretary of State is deliberating, and we'll find out. Obviously, the Secretary of State has called the plan in, and will make a decision on whether it remains unsound or whether they can go ahead with a plan that the inspector thought was deficient in its gypsy and traveller provision.
Councillor Blundell, please.
Can I ask, Laura? Laura, can you give me some guidelines as to what sort of decisions, what sort of pointers will help you make decisions on where garden settlements might most suitably be arranged, please?
That will come out of a combination of our spatial strategy and the sustainability appraisal and the call for sites of exactly where land could possibly be available. But it will need to match up with an overall spatial strategy about what makes sense for which direction the borough should go in.
Yep, sure.
I appreciate what you said for the timing, but I'm asking what factors will you be considering when you decide what areas are most acceptable for garden settlements, please?
Well, there's going to be quite a long list. There'll be everything that was on the framework that we looked at about relationship to Colchester, environmental factors, transport, infrastructure, deliverability. It's a very long list, so I'm not sure, basically we have to look at everything holistically, and also bearing in mind how many houses that we need to deliver and how many houses you could deliver a year and how that might work. That's where the housing market comes in, how many could you build in any one place in a year and how would that work? So, so quite a long list.
Councillor Jowers, please.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Karen, you want to respond?
Yes, I was just going to add to what Laura had said, along with the very detailed assessment criteria that was in part of the report from the last meeting in relation to proposals for garden settlement size developments. There's an additional criteria being applied which comprises of the principles that Mr Barker referred to, and they are garden city principles which cover more wide-ranging issues than the very detailed criteria we're applying to all the other sites as well. So there's additional criteria for all the large-scale proposals that we've been put forward to us.
Thank you.
Councillor Jowers.
Thank you, Chairman. Interesting, really, that Elizabeth brought that issue up, because at one stage I was involved in bringing in that professor who was in charge of Garden City Developments. Karen, I believe you were at that meeting at the stadium with tendering. Yes, who died, unfortunately, and it was. Sure, that was a coincidence. It wasn't. However, no, you're a man of great sort of capacity and deserving of respect. What did come out of that, though, was that his ideal for a garden city was actually 15,000 homes. So I think, when we're talking about garden cities, we need to start looking at the implications of just what the size they potentially could be. There is an argument you could potentially go down to 10,000. And I know that tendering are interested in the concept of garden cities because they have specific problems. I've got one or two qualms. One is that Chelmsford actually comes in the higher value rate. So if you're putting in an HMI with Braintree, tendering and Colchester, it's sort of apples and pears slightly, in that they're 8 to 10 times capacity of income capacity for repaying a mortgage. I can understand that. Malden, I think it's probably best if we don't go there for a while, because, well, not don't go to Malden, I'd thoroughly recommend it, but the issue as to why they are standing aside from it. What concerns me slightly is that we're looking at a lot of things in singularity. We're not necessarily looking at them together. I was interested in the issue of infrastructure, in that, Martin, you probably will know from Five Sides that we are now looking at, and there is government funding towards 3-laning the A12. Well, the first part of that is going to be actually from Chelmsford to Colchester. Now that's going to have a huge impact, because if you start looking at affordability and housing pricing, it in a sense, is defined by how far you are away in commutability. So, you know, one could argue that were that to happen, and equally the Norwich to 90 rail upgrades and improvements, that Colchester is going to be in a, you could argue from one hand it's going to be a very, very good position, or you could argue from the other hand it's going to be in a very poor position because it's going to be extremely popular because housing here is cheaper. So, you know, I was interested in the issue, employment is important, but we don't want to have too much. It's a bizarre stance to take, in a sense. I can understand, I know you'll tell me exactly why in great clarity, but I thought we'd actually always over-provided in housing, but under-provided in terms of employment. And in fact, you know, what comes out of this is very good, and I like Peter Brett Associates, and I think Edge Consulting, and we've had the Essex Planning Officers Association have employed them in the past. But, you know, the good news is that we're probably only going to require 920 houses per annum as a target figure. But of course, that isn't fixed in stone, is it? That's effectively what government will accept, that we can put forward in our local plan, as if we say 920 instead of the 1,065. That would be acceptable. Were we to put it, and I just want confirmation that that's correct, because that means it doesn't put quite as much pressure on us. And for a lot of our electors in the borough, that's going to be really interesting, because that's taking out quite a big chunk annually of housing that one could argue, you know, the point you made about putting it in rural areas is it may well take pressure off rural areas. I don't see it taking pressure off major sites. But I think that certainly, you know, it would give us the opportunity to look rather more closely at the village hierarchy and how we allocate sites. And also within this, it is touched on in other items in that we are going to have a look at village envelopes. I mean, it's something which is fascinating and probably long overdue, and that is going to cause more mayhem than any other thing we will talk about. So I'm, in a sense, quite looking forward to it, because that's been graven in stone as long as I can ever remember. So overall, the issue on this is fine. The figures are great. You know, I don't think they're anything hugely new. It's the figure. It's the implications it has for us. And Karen can answer this, is how does that therefore mean that we alter our whole approach to the local plan when we're dropping 140 houses a year? It's a big chunk, isn't it?
And more.
And more.
Going up to 1,200 and something after year 5.
So you know, it actually poses us to a degree a problem. It's a good way to go. I'd much rather it went that way than it went to 1,400 or 1,500. But it doesn't stop us doing 1,400 or 1,500 a year, if I understand it correctly. And I absolutely agree with Dr. Barker, Professor Barker, Mr. Barker, that why should we not have the same policies that we could or would apply to garden cities? We've already done an update on the urban design guide, and I think hopefully we're still in the process of doing a rural design guide, which is something which I've really pushed forward. Is that just because it's not a garden city issue, I think we really do need to start pushing forward with raising the quality of what we build. So sorry to go on a bit long, Chairman. There are several questions there, but it does sort of maybe concentrate my mind.
Laura, would you like to respond, please?
Yes, I'll address some points, and Karen may wish to add a few as well. Let's see, just on the Malden issue, I realized that the point might have been, is it in our housing market area? And the report explains that, yes, it could be, but it doesn't actually alter the calculations, whether it's in or out. And Malden went through its whole local plan process saying it was a separate housing market area, and the authorities didn't want to get involved with that particular issue, so they've been sort of set to one side. So just to clarify that. On the employment, it's not really saying you have to over-provide, but it's just employment is such a problematic area in terms of allocations. It's that we can't just say, we can say we'll build X number of houses, but it's much harder to say we will provide X number of jobs because we can provide employment land. and those houses don't necessarily come. But what's important is to be realistic about what you're doing, and then obviously all authorities want to have good job growth, but there are consequences of setting a job growth target that might not be backed up by realism. So I think Colchester has a good record of having good jobs growth, and so we can have a high jobs growth target. It just has to be looked at in the round and balanced to see if this then has an undesired effect on housing. And additionally, I think what we also have to bear in mind that will be different for this plan as opposed to 20 years ago is the way employment is changing, the fact that the amount of floor space you need for jobs is decreasing as people are hot desking. There's just all these trends that means it is very hard to rub your crystal ball and know what employment will look like 20 years from now and exactly how that will work. So I think we do need to be thinking about employment, but we are required to be more flexible about where it is, how it's provided, and it then comes back to where jobs are in relation to where people live, and trying to get better connections between where workplaces are and where people live and where all the services are. And just one more point to make on this is around the numbers and the garden cities, is that the garden cities then take us forward beyond the current plan period. What we're trying to do is look far ahead. So if we do garden cities, we're not just looking to the 2032 time scale, because this would go on past that. What we're trying to do is say we need to think ahead into the future, and if we're going to do a garden city, it will need to grow beyond the current plan period. And that's where the actual numbers, it's not about 920 houses a year if you're looking beyond 2032, because some of those numbers are not within this current plan period. So that's another issue to bear in mind.
Go on.
Thanks, Laura. And in fact, you're absolutely right. Elizabeth just said that's cheating, but I can understand perfectly clearly why. Obviously, of a project that size, you couldn't do that within a particular time period. What I'm more concerned with is that we have a history of not providing, we're actually sterilising employment land. And not only that, our policy of brownfield site building, which has served us brilliantly well, where have we built these brownfield housing sites? On employment land. So, to me, there's a slight dichotomy between the two. I'm not saying that we have a problem, really, but I think in the regional spatial strategy, there was an attempt to link percentage growth in jobs to a percentage rise in housing numbers. I know that's extremely difficult to do, but I think we ought to have kind of a stab at it. If you say went back over 10 years' worth of employment provision in relation to what housing we'd done, at least it would give us a steer. Are we just becoming, or are we likely to become a dormitory for London? Or are we actually really, really going out for local employment? So it just might be useful. It's not a criticism.
Karen?
Yeah, if I can just come back on a couple of points. Picking up that one first, I think, yes, we have built some of the housing on brownfield and former employment sites in particular. Some of those employment sites or the companies have redeveloped elsewhere. So they've remained in the town, but we also have to acknowledge the changing economy, changing job sectors, and the need in this part of the world for large shed type employment uses isn't what it was a few years ago. We are seeing a lot more small and medium sized industries. Location and type of unit is changing, so we have to reflect that. And I think, as Laura said, it's not something that we're dismissed at all. We've undertaken an employment land review. We will continue to update that to ensure that we are providing land and premises in the right locations for the right sectors of employment that we're expecting to come forward over the next 15 years or so. And, keep an eye on that, because it changes, doesn't it? As home working and things has an impact on its own. In terms of your question, is 920 the correct number for the local plan? Well, there will be further work that Laura alluded to in terms of sort of constraints and anything else that might influence that number and the need for affordable housing. So, you know, we might be coming back to you and saying that number's changed a bit. We didn't undertake any significant work on the higher figures, so it's not like we've sort of started work on a plan based on 1,200 or 1,065 units a year. So we were at a stage where we were reviewing high level, so that hasn't meant that we've had wasted work in that respect. And then in terms of the Garden City principles, I think you alluded to the fact that there's a certain size of development which can actually be called truly a garden city, and the document that the government and TCPA, Town and Country Planning Association, published was 15,000. But, you know, they'll talk about lower figures than that. The term garden seems to get added to a lot of developments these days. Yes, yes. So, but I think the principles, there's certainly some principles that we should be applying to all development. Things, I've just got them up actually, if anyone saw me thinking I was being rude and looking at my phone. But, you know, beautiful and imaginative new homes and gardens, generous green space, you know, provision of allotments, those sorts of things, then we should be looking at for all developments really. But the scale of garden cities, if they're truly garden cities, means that some of the principles, you know, integrated and accessible transport systems with a series of settlements linked by rapid transport, things around community ownership of land and long-term stewardship of assets, those sorts of principles can really only be applied to a scale of development, you know, probably in the thousands. And we're not, you know, a lot of the sites that we're looking at aren't anywhere near that size. So that's the difference really, but certainly some of them then I think we should aspire to in all new development.
Councillor Arnold next, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the way this discussion has gone, I will raise now the matter that I mentioned to you earlier, and I think it's quite interesting that since I mentioned it to you, we've had two public speakers talking, one about the loss of green land within urban Colchester in relation to the Irvine Road orchard, and also garden cities and the openness of those. It's been sort of brought into my mind by something with which you are well familiar, which is the fact that 12 years ago we had the Northern Approaches Road open in Colchester, and the northern section of that, which links the new road with the via Urbis Romani through to Nayland Road, is now the only remaining bit of the Northern Approaches Road. And it has a wonderful thicket which has matured beautifully down each side of it, gorse and birch and oak and all sorts of other things in there. And the original plan for that road back in the mid-90s was that that would be carried through right the way through to the cuttings of the A134 where they go under the A12, and take it through the other way with perhaps a less of a thicket approach right the way down to North Station, link to Turner Rise, link through to the country park. That was the vision in the mid-90s, and it was a very good vision, and circumstances meant that it wasn't all developed at once. The route of the road changed, and suddenly there was a 400-metre gap between the end of the Northern Approaches Road and the cutting, and Karen will have seen, I mean, I sort of questioned the planning officers, and he did a brilliant piece of work, but as I feared, the opportunity was lost to restore that particular 400 metres of something which would have been a very important migration corridor. It's gone. There's no point in worrying about it. We've done the permissions. We've lost it. What that brought to my mind was firstly a piece of work which Councillor Jowers will remember, which was part of the Garrison Plan panel. When we did the master plan for the new garrison, we actually mapped out a network of the links, the green links within that, which we thought were going to be important, and we put them in the master plan. And I think by and large they survived. And we did that at quite an early stage. And I'm aware that we did that when the master planning for the Northern Growth Area extension was done in Mile End. What I'm not aware of, and what I think Mr. Day has told me in this sort of exchange of emails I've had with him, is that we haven't done that for the whole borough. What we're looking at now, there's one other thing, which was a remark by Ian Vipond when we were looking at some aerial photographs once, that if we'd had a proper borough-wide policy on green links and what we considered important, we might actually have won the appeal on the Persimmon site next to the Colne, because the Persimmon development punched a bloody great hole in what was actually a very good green link along the length of the Colne, the otherwise urban Colne. And I wonder just what we have in place to make sure that when we have finished this by 2032, which of course we won't because we'll roll it on from there, but what piece of work we will have done to identify those green links that still exist through Colchester, and perhaps the orchard would be part of them, I don't know, and protect them for all time. The ones that we say, well, this one is really important because, and you look at the country park now and you see how close it's come to being isolated from the countryside beyond it. Those green links, which are actually very important, simply to provide those migration corridors for flora and fauna, to keep refreshing the populations, the animal populations and so on, of those green spaces that are so important to us. Do we have those links identified? I know we're doing a landscape survey, but I don't think that's quite the same thing. Do we have them identified? Can we protect them? Can we say that a particular site, wherever it is not going to be developed? Because actually, if we do develop that particular site, we have broken for all time a very important piece of migration route. So that's the question.
Karen?
Thank you. Interestingly, I was looking at only this very subject this morning, partly in relation to see if there was actually a green link where Philip Morant have closed off the field, linking the two parts of Norman Way. What it brought to my attention was the green links in that area, so from Norman Way through Blue Bottle Grove, and then linking the footpath around sort of St Benedict School. Doesn't extend the other way round. There's an orbital sort of green link around the school fields, and it doesn't extend towards Irvine Road and up the footpath that's there. So I was thinking, next proposals map, we should be including that as well. So I think I can only say that I support what you're saying about the importance of these links. The Garrison is a good example, really well mapped out, really well implemented, and linking the different parts of the development and indeed existing communities through into the town centre as well. I think Mr Barker is involved in a group that's looking at a possible orbital green link around the borough, which again is something that we have encouraged. And, I'm happy to look at suggestions for green links to include in the future local plan and the proposals map. So, happy for people to suggest them.
Briefly, please.
So what you're saying is you'd be happy for other people to develop a policy on the basis of submissions that happen to be made, but we can't be proactive and say we recognise the benefit of this and we wish to develop it.
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I identified one this morning myself, but just by looking at a map in relation to something else that I think we should be including next time around. There will be a look at new sites, existing sites, and how they link. It's all part of the appraisal of any new sites, how they link into existing the town centre, maybe a hospital, employment sites, that sort of thing. So, no, I'm not relying on other people and saying that maybe will happen. But I think for new sites, it's easier because we can plan those in from the start. It's more the example that I gave where we need to identify, and maybe local people are better at identifying those sites than we are, and saying, actually, there's a really good green link through here. Councillor Goss, for example, was instrumental in getting the link through to the station from New Braeswick Park, and it's that sort of thing, really, that we rely on local people to identify. So, yeah, we'll be doing some work, but there's no reason why other people can't input into that.
It could be part of the consultation we do in the middle of the winter. Thank you, Chairman.
No problem. Councillor Cook.
I don't think I need to say much, Chairman, because the questions, Laura's answered a few of the questions. One was about the Morden thing, wanting to remain individual. She's answered that. We're waiting for something to come out of it. I did read the report and the study. It was based on, in my opinion, on historical facts and events, and then it went into projections and for future possibilities. It was a good report to read, but it's going to rely entirely on the future, as you said, future employment, etc. It's just worth noting today it was announced we, as a country, failed to meet our housing target by 100,000 houses. We haven't got the labour.
Councillor Blundell, please.
Mr. Chairman, Councillor Giles is just talking about employment and employment land. I wonder if one of our officers can tell me approximately what proportion of Colchester residents work at some distance outside Colchester, please.
Well, I'm not necessarily great at remembering numbers, but I do remember the London commuter percentage, which is been historically and continues to be around 10%. And then our self-containment rate of people who live and work in Colchester, I think, is 59%. But I could be wrong.
60 something.
Yeah.
Whilst we're looking for those, Andrew, would you like to pose your points or questions, and we'll come back to answer Les's point?
It was actually a question that Councillor Giles had asked, which is whether the lower housing number took the pressure off the necessity for additional development in our villages, actually. Bearing in mind we're looking at over 100 less houses than we were looking at, and in 5 years' time we're looking at sort of 300 less houses than we had been looking at. I just didn't hear an answer to it. I wonder if there was one.
Well, I think it's not straightforward for any one village, in that we're wanting to take a consistent approach to villages. We're wanting to work with ones and manage change. So there are different attitudes in different villages, and there are also different sites in different villages. So in villages where there's a slightly bigger site and an appetite for a bit more development, there might be more development in that village as opposed to another village that didn't have good sites or without the appetite for change. But the actual numbers will need to translate. We will need to develop, demonstrate that we have a 5, 10-year and 15-year supply of housing, and we will need to be able to show roughly where those are. And also we will, when we go to preferred options, we'll have a housing target, and we'll have to have some general information, which we'll fine-tune as we move towards examination, but we'll have to kind of show how those things work. And the 5-year housing supply is probably, I'm not sure that it's going to change that much between the 1,000 and the 900, just because of where sites have come up and the availability. So it's probably not straightforward that a village either gets 100 houses or it doesn't get 100 houses over time, because it's depends on a number of considerations around the village and the overall housing needs. So we're doing more work on affordability, so that will also play into about how we're dealing with rural exception sites. Eddie will be talking about that. So housing will be delivered in a variety of different ways.
Lynn.
Thank you. Just a question really going back to job creation in relation to developments. Whether a couple of years ago the creative sector was one of the fastest growing, well, it was the fastest growing in Colchester, and we were looking, obviously their needs, they are smaller units as you said, and the nature of jobs is changing. Is it still the case that is the industries are the fastest growing here, and are we accommodating that? I know now at long last the former police station is going to be converted into a creative hub with units, but are we doing anything in relation to those people and creating those jobs?
Sure. The employment and land needs assessment that came to this committee a meeting or two ago did look into where all the growth sectors were, and they certainly identified the creative sector, as well, I think, publishing. You know, there were certain things, and so we do have that information. We do have the knowledge of where we think the jobs will be growing, and then obviously the job is to try to marry that up with kind of floor space needed. So certainly in the town centre there are those opportunities, and the council is very proactive. It's looking to, you know, obviously the creative business centre is a good example where, because we know that sector is growing, we're targeting it and trying to provide specific premises for those areas. So I think we have a good understanding. It's just the extent to which we can then match up allocations and the market's happy with those allocations.
Yeah, so it's still vibrant and developing.
Yes.
Karen, did you manage to find any more figures to answer Liz's question on commuters and people that stay within the borough, etc., from a jobs perspective?
No, there's figures in the report, in the housing report, about where people commute in and out of and from, and our strongest links are Tendring and Braintree. What the census does, and I was just looking for the relevant part of the census, is percentage figures of people that live and work in the borough. And I know it was considered to be quite high in the 2001 census at 71%. And it's been updated in the 2011 census to, I believe, 60-something%. I was just looking, I can't find the relevant report, but I think that's still the case. I'll confirm that to everyone by email.
Thank you. Councillor Jowers.
Yeah, it's just a follow-up, really, Chairman, to Andrew's question about my question. The reason I asked about the rural sites is because I might have misread it this morning in the broadsheet newspaper that, in fact, there is going to be the capacity for affordable market housing on exception sites, and that's a big change. That's a big change. And the impact that's likely to have, I'm not sure. I think it was actually George Osborne rather than Greg Clark, which is a bit worrying. If you find it on there, Christopher, it's the Times. It might be in others as well. So you know, cheap countryside homes for the first-time buyers, and in a sense that ties into what we've been talking about in past meetings, I think. But it's going to have implications on village envelopes, because you could argue, is it necessary to change when you can actually have affordable exception sites without, you know, with market housing sites? So that again throws up yet another sort of variable for us. It's only a comment, Martin. I don't think, you know, that it impacts on this report, but it does tie into the affordable housing report, obviously. And if we're looking at percentages of affordable housing within the plan, this actually could have quite an impact on it. So just a thought.
Thank you. And Councillor Gerard Oxford, please.
Thank you, Chairman. A few points. Affordable housing, one of my pet ones. We will need very much more of that because we're a low salary town. So therefore people are struggling to get on the property market. So more and more will need to rent, and therefore we'll need to provide more affordable housing for the renting market. But with the fact that our percentages that we used to require through planning being more than halved, we're not getting a percentage anywhere near what we would need to make a dent in our housing needs register. The other thing is I brought up a couple of meetings ago it's been identified that we will need 2 more travellers sites during the period, each of 24 pictures, and we will obviously need to look at people bringing land forward for consideration for that. And also with partners, when we're discussing with neighbouring authorities, are we breaching the subject about transit site? Because we haven't got one in the county, with other authorities around us. I think that's a subject that's going to have to be had. Sorry, thank you.
Anyone wish to respond?
I think these are all areas that we'll look into. Gerard's right, there's evidence about the affordable housing needed, but that has to be balanced against deliverability and how many houses overall the borough can accommodate each year. Gypsy and traveller sites, we will look to provide the identified need. I think the issue of transit sites is a county-wide issue which needs to be addressed at a county level as well. I can't imagine one authority taking the lead on that subject. So it's something that we're certainly aware of as well.
So no more other questions, so I think I'll have Chairman's summary, as I've not really said anything on this. Good discussion. I think overall the housing numbers are lower than we were originally expecting, still higher than I'd like, because consistently Colchester, believe it or not, in the audience may have heard this before, 850 houses have been built on average in Colchester for 40 years. And in fact, I moved here in 1978 when I was 4. So not far off 40 years now, actually. So we've been building it pretty much since I moved here, which is surprising. We are a low salary town. If you look at the figures, Colchester's salaries are generally lower than the national average, which concerns me with all this housing we're expected to take. And one of the biggest things that concerned me, I actually read a report at work. For those in the audience, I work in the insurance industry. My company sponsored a report where the whole market is changing. In the 2011 census, less people now than ever own their own home. House ownership is going down. People that rent is going up in various sectors. And the new market forces which seem to be coming through is that big organisations like Legal and General and other big stakeholder pensions, I don't work for Legal and General, by the way, is that they're now looking to invest in something called buy to rent, which is about building great swathes of housing that they own or pension companies own, and they will then charge rents. Now then they're claiming that the quality of these builds will go up and it will help solve the national housing crisis. But when you've got more and more people being forced into private rentals, making pension companies richer, this seems to be where some of our organisations are going with government. And I read the report and was quite concerned, so I thought it was worth raising here, and it looks like Karen would like to respond on that. It is also quite surprising, whether it's believable, that Colchester does still retain a high proportion of people that work in the area rather than commuting to London, but we will look at those figures again, although it has gone down from the 2001 census, but that does surprise people. But if you want to pick up on my buy to rent comment, no.
I found an excellent document which my team produced and I should have known about, but is on the Colchester Borough website, which is travel to work patterns, and it's based on the 2011 census and dated September 2014, and that shows that 69% of employed residents stay in the borough. So that's gone down a bit from the 71%, but not significantly. Almost 25,000 people, employed residents, leave the borough. Of these, 25% go to Greater London. 15% to Tendring District, 15% to Braintree. So that gives you an idea, but there is, like I say, a 15-page document which details a lot more of that.
Interesting.
Liz, one quick one.
Can I just say that what you were saying about trends of people not owning their own houses, in the greater part of Europe, people do not expect to own their own houses. They rent them, and it looks as though we might be following. Thank you.
Yeah, the difference is that Europe tends to the difference is Europe, we tend to have 30-year rental contracts, whereas here, of course, we're on 6 months. So, but I agree, the market may well be changing, and the UK has historically been quite obsessed with house ownership. Maybe that is changing. Okay, I think we've done that one to death. So thank you for that. Let's move on to the sports facility strategy, which is item 9. Oh, actually, you're right. We have to just agree to note the report, I believe. Thank you very much. And then item 9 is the sports facility strategy, which is down for Beverley McLean, but I believe it will be Karen.
Thank you. This report's before members for information, and you've probably read most of what's in the report in the local papers before tonight, actually.
Was it accurate, though?
There was quite a lot of interest in the study when it was published through a portfolio holder report. But for us, it's a useful part of the evidence base, like we spoke about today. It's just one form of community infrastructure, really, that we need to incorporate within the future local plan. I don't think anyone would dispute the vision in the study to create high-quality, sustainable and accessible sports facilities which can meet community needs, increase participation and help tackle health and crime issues. Pages 100 to 104, there's tables which summarise challenges, issues and priorities for both indoor and outdoor sport provision. There's actually a typo on page 103. The table number 4 should be entitled Key Strategic Priorities for Outdoor Sport Provision. We've already done indoor on the previous page. The report allows us to identify future requirements and plan for them through the local plan, and through new developments, working with partners such as the university and also exploring other funding opportunities.
Councillor Nash.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very surprised in this report that we have several facilities regarding angling which are not mentioned. We've got Highwoods Country Park, lake there. We have Castle Park, the river there. It's also been there's also been very detailed studies made by Sport England and other institutions that angling has a very beneficial effect on children and helps prevent crime. It is also helps the elderly take exercise and sport on a regular basis, and I'm quite surprised that it's not mentioned in here. We've got the River Colne that I notice now has got signs through Castle Park saying no fishing. And is controlled by the Colchester Oyster Fisheries. When I spoke to Councillor Feltham about it, she said she'd have a look into it, and she hasn't got back to me yet. Interestingly, that in Castle Park there are 4 disabled swims for disabled people to fish. Now they're being denied that opportunity. And have to go to Highwoods Country Park where there's facilities there. But even there they have difficulty in getting there because it's such a long walk from the car park. So with all of these facilities, I just wonder why they haven't been mentioned, because they all have a beneficial effect on people who go angling, and I'm just surprised about it.
I'll get the office to certainly respond to that, but I suppose you could argue that on every single sport, because not every single sport is mentioned. We don't talk about ping pong or you know, other sports. Take your point, but I guess it's more of a strategy, so it won't necessarily.
Well, the
strategy is more high level as opposed to, you know, details of every ping pong table in Colchester or whatever. But we'll let the officer respond.
Not many. There's quite a few people who don't play football, Chair. So.
Yeah, I think Councillor Goss is correct that it doesn't look at every single sport. In fact, the 4 volumes actually cover indoor sports facilities, which angling isn't included in. And also the other part of it is about playing pitches. So there are some elements such as angling and probably skateboarding and things like that which aren't covered by this report.
Go on, one more supplementary.
I'll take exception to this because angling is one of the biggest participation sports in the country, and to say we don't talk about every sport, I just find it's quite incredible we don't, especially when we've got our own facilities. Right, we've got our own facilities here. We've got Castle Park, we've got Highwoods Country Park, we've even got Distillery Pond. So, there's
Well, I can actually tell you where there are some ping pong facilities, but I won't. Karen, is that something that we'll look at sweeping up in a future document, or do you think we've covered everything reasonably well?
Yes, I'm not proposing to that we do a further report on sport unless there's something identified as missing from the evidence base. And certainly we hear from a range of sporting activity organisers such as ping pong, and that was a good case to use because there is a shortage of facilities. Perhaps from what Councillor Nash has said, we're adequately provided for in terms of angling, and that's why we don't hear from people. But there's a number of sports that aren't covered in this, but I don't think the local plan depends on us doing a further sporting strategy.
Thank you. Councillor Oxford next.
Thank you, Chairman. Page 101, it says here, any new school build should consider how sports facilities are made available to the public, wider community. Just a little bit of a concern about it because my school has got joint use agreement, had it in place, runs to 2042. Now, there are talks about varying it, and it's a case about making sure that any agreements that are reached stand the test of time and don't, because it can become costly to both sides in negotiations. So I just wanted to flag it up that it needs to be very carefully thought out.
Go on then, Barry.
Sorry to jump in on this, but you're talking about the Gilbert School. They've just built a £2.1 million sports hall, but it's not open to the public. It's not going to be open to the public. Nobody can use it on the public. It's part of it is built by private
company,
private management, private finance, and they put that clause into it.
Yes, the school were not allowed to do it, open it to the public. In fact, they're not allowed to use it in the evening either. It's part of the planning consent. So,
I think it's disgusting, quite frankly.
Well, so do I. I think it should be used every day and every night and be available to the public. But that's not what the planning consent says.
I might be wrong, but was there not another issue to do with reclaiming VAT depending on how they set it up as a charitable trust, and therefore VAT couldn't have been reclaimed if they'd done it in a standard way or something like that? I'm sure I read that somewhere, but probably going a bit off piste in fairness. But I agree, it's a loss of a fantastic facility. But I think there were some tax implications with the way they were operating, and it would have cost them a lot more money around the VAT, which of course is now 20%.
In my discussions with Linda, the head of the school, the only thing she's ever brought up is the fact that the planning permission had to have this condition in, and the school didn't want it. They wanted to be able to use it into the evening. So I'm I think it's not the school in this instance.
Certainly something that we can take offline, because I think it is a concern to the town. But as I say, I think there were some tax implications, and that's why they had to go down that route. Yeah. So that's that. Okay, Councillor Jowers.
Thank you, Chairman. What appears to be perhaps missing here is that this talks about Colchester, but it actually talks about the town more than anywhere else. I don't actually see a single village mentioned in here. And if we're going to stick God knows how many more houses outside on our local urban centres, I believe they're called, it's a bit galling that if you want to go to a swimming pool, say from Mersey, it's a £4, I think it's £4.80 return, you know, or £4.80 each way, something ridiculous. Apart from the fact it takes you 3/4 of an hour each way. So the town, it's been a gripe of mine for the last 20 odd years, is that the town is magnificently well supplied, but some of the larger rural settlements get very little indeed. Classic case, again, Mersey, which it would be, is that we did gain some Section 106 agreements on extra land for pitches, but yet we're still so pressured that we've got local teams trying to book slots in Colchester. I mean, it's ridiculous. And that's with an extra 17 acres, which we've now had to try and slot the local rugby team on. In terms of a planning strategy point of view, I think maybe we ought to, and I'm glad to see it does follow the BETS report, because I think we do need to be much more on the ball about making sure that amongst the multitude of other community infrastructure levy or Section 106 issues, is we do really need to start looking at what we think would not just necessarily be stuck in the centre of the town. Classic one in certain roads, certainly in my division, would be cycleways, not just in towns. You try and drive to Malden along the back road and you will come across an awful lot of lycra-clad gentlemen who take their lives in their hands, I think, on every bend. And we don't seem to be doing much. You know, we're talking about cycle lanes and bus lanes in Lexton Road. Well, how about something in some of the rural areas? A bit more support for Sustrans, perhaps, that sort of thing. And maybe we could sort of factor that into what conditions we're putting on. There just seems to be a little bit of a lacunae here in that it's all Colchester town, not much for the local urban centres. Not all of it, Karen. I can see you looking highly miffed there. That you went out to several other, I mean, you look at every netball pitch in Colchester, probably. There's not many of them left.
They've all been built on.
There's no answer. There's no answer to that. So I'm specifically looking at places like Tiptree, Wivenhoe, and Mersey.
Apart from the faux pas on netball courts, can you answer Councillor Giles' point on villages and more urban areas?
Yeah, there is quite detailed tables which aren't in this report because the documentation was too big to include in the agenda itself, but I think there's a link in the online agenda that takes you through, and you'll see there that there's been quite a lot done on the borough as a whole. And in the summary of the South, for example, it comments that there's only one adult club, West Mersey Island Rugby Union Club, one adult pitch which is overplayed. Cricket, the South has the largest amount of overplay, the most being at West Mersey Cricket Club, the Glebe. So yeah, there is a lot of background data, and maybe it's not come through in the summary tables that way, but certainly the rural areas were looked at as well. Yeah.
And undersupplied. Just to finish, Chairman, I'd welcome Councillor Naish to come and be thoroughly seasick on any of the 5 charter boats out of Mersey, and he can eat what he catches from there.
Any other councillors wish to make a point on point 9? A couple of quick points from me. I think the paper did pick up on the actual cost of delivering this was something like £25 million. I'd like to know where that funding's coming from. And secondly, I suspect there'll be more innovative ways things are delivered if you take the David Lloyd sports facilities that are coming in North Colchester, certainly we've had conversations with them about trying to open some of that up for community use, which they've been quite receptive to, particularly around allowing schools access off-peak, obviously when their pool or tennis facilities may not be utilised to their full extent. So there are some positive conversations, and I expect there'll be more innovative solutions. But I agree, we've lost the Royal London Sports Club. We're moving the rugby club potentially and increasing things around the A12. So I agree that massive investment is required, and it's where all the funding comes from. You know.
Sorry, can I just...
Go on.
Yeah, just looking at this swimming pool here, for the number of residents we've got in the town, the swimming provision actually doesn't look that brilliant on here. We've got this Corporal Bad VC swimming pool. Now, have we got any sort of service level agreement or anything where we can use, you know, residents can use that, or is that exclusively for the military? Because we've lost the one now at the former Sir Charles Lucas, haven't we? So that provision's gone, and we've lost the old Garrison swimming pool. So is there anything in this to sort of address that problem? It doesn't look very brilliant to me now. I've just read it through.
No, I think swimming pools are one of those areas where we do need to work in partnership. I mean, a few years ago, the university were talking about building a new swimming pool. That didn't happen, but I think they've got plans for enhancing their sport and leisure provision, but I don't know the details of that. The swimming pool and how it's used on the Garrison, I'm not sure of the details of that. I know when the fitness pool roof was being repaired at Leisure World, there was some agreements put in place there. So things like the Water Polo Club and the Phoenix Swimming Club and that were able to use the Garrison pool. They're certainly, you know, encouraging community use of other facilities, but I'm not sure how much use there is of the pool. I have to say that might be one to pick up with probably Simon Grady in Leisure.
I think we'll follow that through, actually, because that definitely...
Build one at Mersey for John.
I think that's covered it. The only other thing...
Nothing in Mark's Bows, don't worry.
The only other thing I'd say, of course, is the obesity figures that have just come out recently show that 1/5 of children in the Colchester district are obese. So I think making sure our sports provision and getting people to participate as much as possible is more important than ever. I think we'll leave that there and move on to item 10, which is for Eddie Bacon. Oh yes, sorry, we have got to agree and note. I'm getting too excited this evening. We've got item 10, and if we're gone.
I have to declare a bit of an interest in this because I've just realised I'm Vice President of the Rural Community Council of Essex, and Messing I was heavily involved in because it's part of my division.
Thank you for that. So we've agreed item 9. We move on to item 10. We do have 2 speakers. We have Mr Siggs and we also have Councillor Sykes. Mr Siggs is the first speaker. If you'd like to come up. And just for note for the committee, Mr Siggs has submitted some papers to us as well, which I'm sure he'll bring up in his conversation. Mr Siggs.
Mr Chairman, thank you. I am the clerk of the Rosemary Almshouse Charity, and I've submitted 2 papers to you. One is the site which the charity owns at London Road, Stanway, which is currently in a white area, but which we have been discussing with your council the last couple of years, the possible exception site status. All the shenanigans with the Homes and Community Agency on the changes of law have made these decisions, these discussions difficult. And the other question we've been asked by Colchester Borough planners is, can we prove a need for older people's accommodation in Stanway? Well, there are 10,000 people, 11,000 people in Stanway, and we're quite convinced in our own private surveys that there is a need for older persons' accommodation, affordable accommodation in Stanway. The other paper I've put to your committee for consideration is based on the paper which has come out from the County Council, May this year, on independent living. And this indicates the severe problems, and these are being highlighted every day in the press, of housing older people in this current generation. You've heard today of all the problems with care homes. Care homes are becoming unaffordable. Where are people going to go? I'm very conscious of the fact that it's necessary for us to use the Care Act of 2014. And what I would encourage your council to do is to work with the County Council and the NHS to make sure that housing provision, to prevent people having to go into care, is necessary. We want to build 24 units or so on the site at Stanway. These will be single story, but we also not only want to provide lifetime homes for the residents, but we want to join into a partnership with a local care agency so that through their lives at the new almshouses, people will have the benefit of having care available to them so that they don't have to go into residential or nursing care.
Thank you very much. Any of the committee got any questions? Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Sykes, would you like to take your position? Okay, thank you.
Committee. I'm not a public speaker, so I'm going to have to read this. And I must declare a non-pecuniary interest as I'm a trustee of the Rosemary Almshouses. I did come here some years ago and met most of this committee when I brought the parish plan for adoption. And in our parish plan, we identified a need that people wanted to live more as a community in Stanway, and there was a need for these types of homes. Anyway, I'll begin. Currently in the parish of Stanway, we have 5 purpose-built almshouses. These were built back in the 1935 and were donated by a local resident for the poor and needy widows of Stanway. Well, this has changed, obviously, and we do have a gentleman in one of our accommodations. Although these properties are getting on a bit now, we provide excellent housing for our tenants. Recently, just as an example, to assist independence for a resident, we changed steps to a ramp, allowing the resident the pleasure of their garden. So we actually give that personal touch as well. So Stanway is a great place, and it is the great place today because over the years our residents, and the mainly more elderly residents, invested and worked hard building up a strong community. The trustees wish to develop these new homes, and there are homes for life. I don't want to touch on what Michael said, but this land is not currently zoned for development, and we've been told it's white land, and the use is has to be for exceptional development. The land the trustees have was given over The trustees' aim is to provide homes for our local elderly residents who want to stay for whatever reason they need this accommodation. These homes will provide security, encourage independence and promote social inclusion, with the reassurance that they can stay in Stanway with their families and friends close by. Supportive families provide comfort and care when needed, reducing the need and cost of outside care. Our aim is to keep the family unit together. Please can you really look at supporting the development of this scheme? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Any questions for Laura from anybody? Okay. Karen, would you like to respond?
I didn't want to respond. I just wanted a point of clarification, probably from Mandy. Knowing councillors can sub on planning committee now. I didn't know whether you wanted to say anything, Mandy, about talking site specifics.
The usual answer would be that committee members attend meetings with different hats on. So although Councillor Sykes might be a member of the planning committee, she can still make representations to this committee.
Sorry, no. It was...
I understand what Laura is saying, but any of us who might find ourselves sitting on the planning committee commenting on this site and this proposal tonight might find ourselves ruled out with dealing with it when it comes up in the planning committee. So we can't, even if it's within our terms of reference, and I'm not sure it is it?
No, I don't think we can do it.
We used to print them in the agenda, and it's
sounds like a planning issue.
it sounds like a planning issue. It's perilous for us to take this here.
Just note it.
Yep, noted. Gerard, anything you want to say without...
Yeah, I don't want to talk about this particular site. I want to talk about the principle, because I think, you know, population is getting older. We all know this. And I know from personal experience, my parents are 89 and 90, and they constantly are telling us they want to remain in their own home and with family around them. I think this type of block of accommodation would fall in amongst our affordable quota, but also enable people in various urban areas as well as rural areas to remain in the areas that they've lived in and have friends with, rather than having to go into sterile places. I was being careful over what I was going to say. I had my mother-in-law was in a care home, and put it this way, I don't want my parents in there. So everything that can be done to keep elderly people in their home, where with their belongings around them and friends and family able to support them, I think is something the principle we should look at. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody. Let's actually move on to the item now, item 10, and let Mr Bacon present.
Thank you, Chair. The report I presented in the papers is to note the submissions recently received under the revised rural exception policy. The MPPF introduced a substantial change in rural housing policy in 2012, with key amendments being development needs to meet the local needs via housing needs survey. Market housing is allowable to enable a cross-subsidy of affordable homes. Affordable homes should always be higher than the provision of market homes on the sites. And finally, consistent standard of design and quality in public spaces between affordable and market homes. We've had two schemes since the change in policy. The first being in Dedham of 9 homes, which has recently passed permission, and the second being 2 in Messing. Full details are in the report of both schemes. I won't divulge the details now. Both schemes did require cross-subsidy from the market homes to enable the delivery of affordable homes, with Messing providing more for the community in such as an allotment area, 27 spaces for the adjoining school, and also a drop-off zone for the school, on top of the affordable homes. Recent experience from our planning officers was positive, separate officers on each case, but they commended the good working relationships between all the parties, so the parishes are very supportive, the developer as well as the RPs or registered providers on both schemes. My own experience was positive, and such delivery I would welcome as additional method of securing affordable housing across the borough in future. And finally, picking on one of the developers' experience in Dedham, they had a very positive experience and wish to replicate this model elsewhere in villages throughout Essex. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm open to any questions.
You certainly are, and the first one is Councillor Jowers.
Well, actually, Chairman, not so much questions. I was specifically going to say what a good report. You know, it's a cheering, and it's a report that we don't see often enough. What I'd also say is that my involvement on the Messing one was peripheral, but actually Councillor Ellis really ought to fill you in on just how much work was put in, and it really goes to the heart of what a rural, what any councillor should do. Is that, I'm going to embarrass him.
Yeah, you are,
absolutely brilliant. Is that this is a scheme that, it's perfect. I mean, look at it. This is 23 letters of support and providing allotments and parking at the school. And they sound like simple things, but they're not. And, you get into these very small rural villages, and anything that goes outside the boundary is anathema. And, this worked really well. And apparently the Hallfield Farm Dedham wonders. So they're really important that they show that this can be done if there's a will. If we sort of, what's really cheering is that planners could see the community benefit. It wasn't just what's in the regulations, what's black and white. There was a will to say, yeah, let's get this done, because there wasn't a downside, really. So I'm just saying, Andrew needs he really needs congratulating in what he did, because Messing is a pretty salty bunch at times. They're not short in putting forward an opinion, which is as it should be. And yet they all work together. So I may be over-eulogising it, but I'm really pleased because it shows we can do this.
Councillor Ellis.
I wasn't doing this for any self-aggrandisement at all. I actually asked for this report really because I wanted other councillors to be able to see what we could do now, because I didn't know that everyone is aware about these rural exception sites and the fact that market housing can be used now. And actually it was the market housing that unlocked this site, because it would never have been unlocked without us being able to do that. I'd been asked for, to find allotments, or the village had been asking for allotments for a long time. The school came to me saying, can you please help us? We're trying to find car parking. And I actually went to Karen and said, could we use this as an exception site? Is there a way that we could do this? She said, we need to find an affordable housing element. Is how we'll unlock it. We then had the RCCE involved, obviously. Excellent work done by them to identify the housing need. There was a housing need for Messing, which was 2 units. And that's how the whole thing happened. But I mean, it's Karen's team, fantastic, working very closely with the developer, with the school, with the parish council, everybody to make this happen. And it was really, Chairman, so that people, I think all councillors should see this. There's nothing to do with, as I say, aggrandisement for myself. And the thing in Dedham, the scheme in Dedham is much larger and greater, but it's really to make sure that everyone is aware that this can happen, and that actually, as a borough, we're very supportive of it, and we've got officers who now have the experience in delivering it. And I know that the developer from Dedham has said how well it's gone. Certainly, I know the developer in Messing is very pleased with the way everything went with the borough and how well they were looked after and guided. So I just think it's something that is important that everyone knows. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barton, please.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent scheme, actually, and I'm glad you drew our attention to it. It's really successful. I just wonder, what is the definition of a small site, though, for these rural exceptions? What would be the maximum number that you could actually build?
I don't know if Eddie wants... Do you want...
One of the essence of the MPPF is to ensure you're meeting housing needs. So If your need is 100, you need to stay around the 100 mark. If your need is 5, you need to stay around the 5 mark. The second criteria is never provide more market homes than affordable, so you're capped at affordable. So if you only got a need for 5, you can only provide up to 4 market homes, because you can never go above the provision of affordable numbers. So there isn't a cap, it's more about the local need and local sites.
Okay, Councillor Arnold, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Following on from what Councillor Ellis said, I mean, this is sort of left hanging. If it's important that everybody should see it, and I absolutely agree that it is, then we need to get this out beyond the confines of members of the local plan panel and the other.
It's been in the paper. It's been in the newspaper.
But not everybody, only 18,000 copies of that newspaper get sold across the borough.
Are you going to put it through those
What I'm
doors?
suggesting is, should we be promulgating this to the parishes somehow so that all of them are aware of what is possible? And to the other members of council, but to the parishes, to make them aware of what they can do, because this, you know, it needs parish support. That's the place we should be starting.
I think that's a good point. I also think it should be circulated to all councillors internally as well, because not everyone will probably be aware or have seen it. We've got a new intake of councillors this year, probably have some next year. So again, I think circulate internally, and I think parishes, you're right. Eddie, are you going to be sorting that out for us?
We are actively pursuing every parish in the borough regarding affordable housing. We are looking to hold an affordable housing or rural housing event late part of the year for chairs to come to, because we haven't pursued the opportunities for some time. We've kind of let the market sort itself, so now we're enabling the availabilities of rural housing, what can be provided. So we're sharing Messing and Dedham experience, as well as working with the RC to share what's happening in the whole of Essex, not just Colchester.
Chairman, if I may, could I, as a former parish council chairman twice, and sort of heading for 30 years as a parish councillor, suggest that you spread your net a little wider than just the chairman, just to make sure that there are plenty of people on each parish council who are aware of the possibilities, because I love the chairman of parish councils. They are wonderful people, but not all of them are in favour of exception schemes in their villages.
So it should definitely go to all parish clerks, without question, because they are supposed to forward stuff on to every single councillor within the parishes of varying size and proportions. If there's no other points or questions, then I will ask us to note the submission, and also for the action points to be followed up, please, which will be in the minutes. Thank you. That brings us to the close of the meeting. It just leaves me to remind everybody, especially as we've had a good turnout tonight, that the next meeting is on the 5th of October. If you're not doing anything, please come and join us. I'm sure it'll be exciting. You'll have to look that up. I've only got the dates. The 14th, there's also the 14th of December, just before Christmas, the 8th of February next year, and the 4th of April, just in case you haven't got those in your diary. That brings me to end the meeting. Thank you, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it.